sense now from another expert on what might have caused this blast and what dangers may still exist. I'm joined now by Professor Richard Walls. He's a senior lecturer, a structural and civil engineer from Stellenbosch University, and he's also the lead researcher at the Fire Engineering Research Unit at the university. Prof, thank you so much for your time. So it's interesting what Professor Terence McCarthy was saying, his views. He doesn't believe that mining could have caused this. Egoli Gas is saying, not us, because we didn't have a drop in gas pressure. We don't actually know. So I understand we're in the realm of speculation, but I'm happy that we're actually theorizing with someone who really has so much vast experience in engineering. Starting with the blast. Do you believe that gas of some form, possibly methane, could have caused this? Because if we look at the footage, and we are going to play it again, that dramatic moment of impact, it was a very strong force. What do you think?
Correct. I think we're almost invariably looking at a flammable gas mixture that has built up in some sort of conduit below the road. So we don't know exactly. I mean, we're waiting for details from the investigation, so everything is speculation. I mean, firstly, condolences to the family on behalf of the South African Civil's Fire Engineering Division and Stellenbosch University. But now looking at this, there are a couple of options, and they're going to have to test various hypotheses of what may have happened. I mean, if you do have a gas line, you would expect to see flaming afterwards, so you would expect to see combustion lasting longer. If you have a buildup of gas, but then upon ignition it basically is all consumed, then you won't see flaming afterwards. You will see then the no flames emitting afterwards, and then it stops. So it's definitely quite a blast. I mean, it's probably lifted about 500 tons of roadway up there with the taxis and everything else. So it's quite a significant blast. But you can see also the energy is primarily dissipated vertically. So as the previous professor noted, that it appears to have been shallow to the surface, and then the energy has been released upwards. So as this a spark, whatever it was, I mean, it could have even been a stompy thrown in a stormwater drain, ignited, and then lifted the section of the street. So we'll wait to see what the investigations show, but definitely some sort of combustible mix. Something like LP gas is heavier than air, so will collect in a stormwater drain or sewer. Methane's lighter, so probably vent out, but we'll have to find out what was the cause, where was it contained, uncontained, could it vent out, etc. So there's a lot of investigation that still needs to be ongoing.
All right. So am I understanding you correctly that it looks almost definitely like some form of gas, but doesn't look likely that it's a gas line that caught fire, because then you'd have ongoing flames, more like a build-up that then something sparked it to just suddenly explode? Is that correct?
Well, once again, we'll wait for the investigation,
sure.
But you don't see flaming afterwards.
Yeah. Okay.
So whatever was ignited, there was none of it at the end, or it was below its low flammability limit, because gases only burn within a certain range. So, for instance, LP gas is roughly 2 to 10%, roughly. And so if there's too little gas concentration there, it won't ignite, and if there's too much, it won't ignite. So you'd also have needed that concentration depending on what gas was ignited in the void it was in, so that there was some air, and then also within the right range, especially where the ignition started, and then it would have propagated from the ignition point down this whatever void or whatever system where the ignition was caused and spread through.
Okay, so taking that a little further, build-up of gases possibly looks like the most possible explanation at this point, with all the caveats, as you say, that the investigation is ongoing. A build-up of gases, how do these gases build up? Do they build up because of, if I think of methane, for example, that's naturally occurring. That comes from things like sewage. It comes from mining. It's a byproduct of coal. Could that just sort of build up naturally, and then it's in the wrong area at the wrong time, and then there you go, poof?
It is possible. There have been videos around the world showing some sort of ignitions. You'd need to be, once again, within the flammability limit, and it would need to not escape. So you'd have to trap it there and make sure it can't escape. So it depends on what type of gas. If the gas is lighter than air, you need to make sure it can't escape upwards. If it's heavier than air, you need to make sure it can't escape downwards. So, for instance, something like LP gas, that's why there's quite strict regulations when you have a system that it's not near stormwater drains and inlets. So if there is a leak. Otherwise, it will go into your stormwater or sewer system and then potentially accumulate. But once again, it depends on what sort of gas we're looking at, what would have been the mechanism that would have led to the buildup.
I see. And just explain to me what exactly LP gas is. Is that the gas you buy in the canisters? Is that the piped gas that we find?
Liquefied petroleum gas primarily consists of propane and butane and some others in different mixes. And that's the thing you find in your gas cylinders, so LPG. So you could have a cylinder somewhere or an installation that leaked out. It could come from various different spots, but it's your typical over-the-counter gas that you get. I don't know what other gases are in the area, what lines we may have, what businesses, etc. But that is one of the possibilities in terms of something that could have built up in the area, especially if there was local supplies available.
In any big city, in any city, you're going to have a lot going on under the surface. There are all sorts of tunnels. In Johannesburg particularly, you know, we are a mining city. We go back over 100 years. There are old mine tunnels, but there's also, I understand, old post office tunnels, old railway tunnels, let alone the current infrastructure tunnels for water, sewage, electricity. Does that suggest that any kind of fix is going to be very difficult and finding the source of the problem could be difficult?
I would need to get out there and investigate myself. However, when I see the blast, the video of the blast, I'd agree with the previous professor who noted it as being relatively shallow because the energy had to dissipate, and it appears sort of a roughly 0.5 meter to 1 meter thick slab of material has been lifted up. So as shown on the screen, so it's the tarmac and the layer works below the road, but I'm not suspecting it. As I said, this is based on fairly limited information, that it was more than 1 meter. So I'm not expecting this to be 5 meters under the ground. And also, if you look at the distance it ran, it propagated down whatever this void was. So my suspicion is that it's in some sort of existing service. I think it's highly unlikely we'd have old railway tunnels or whatever it is 1 meter below the surface. So we'll wait to see what they find, but it's probably an existing service. I mean, it might not be used anymore, but some sort of void reasonably close to the surface, but not 5 meters down, meter maximum, probably
right. So,
2, but probably
so that
less.
also might make it a little easier to perhaps fix. But every city has these sorts of challenges. Surely every city has to monitor for gas levels and build-up of gases and dangerous build-up of gases. Could this be lack of attention to infrastructure? Could this be lack of monitoring that has allowed this to happen?
We don't know, and I think that will depend on where we find the source. So if the source was bulk infrastructure that wasn't maintained, then that would be due to lack of maintenance. If it was from a local, let's say, business who had a major leak and went down their drains into the sewer or the stormwater system, that would be a different problem. So then it may be flouting the LP gas installation rules. So it could be a variety of things depending on where it comes from. A lot of these things are dealt with just in sort of general installation and maintenance requirements, that these systems, when you do have flammable gases, there's quite strict rules of how they should be dealt with. So it once again, it depends on what caused it, and hopefully that will come to light within the next few days so we can know if if this will happen again or not.
Well, that was going to be my next question. I mean, is the danger over, do you think?
If it was a point source, let's say now there was a local business and they had a leak into a drain and it built up and exploded. Well, if that leak has stopped, then unlikely to happen again. And I did see in the reports them noting that people in the area, there was no sort of accumulation of gas, no poisoning of people in the area. So it appears there isn't a major leak. However, if there is a line somewhere that is leaking as undetected, then maybe. So it really depends on the source of the combustible gas, which we don't know at this stage.
So your best sort of theories focus on this being quite close to the surface. Does that suggest, and very much focused on the road, does that suggest that surrounding buildings are structurally safe? Can we say that with certainty?
Not with certainty, but if you do have a look at those buildings, most of them are high-rises. So typically you will have what's called a piled foundation. So that's basically a giant concrete column that's been cast into the ground. And also if you have a look at the shop fronts, when the blast wave propagated, you don't see significant cracking of the walls and the shop fronts. So I don't see a major energy movement through to the walls and causing damage of the adjacent buildings. The buildings right close, I mean, I think they should be checked out, especially if there's major cracking that's being caused in the brickwork, damage to concrete columns. But if most of the energy did get used up, basically lifting up the roadway, then hopefully the damage to the surrounding buildings will be fairly limited. And also those piled foundations go quite deep. So they'll go way past the level of where this blast occurred. However, if you did have a shallow pad foundation, then that could be a problem. So it'll depend on the structural system used and then also how far it was. But it did seem at least there was quite a number of meters between the blast and then where the buildings were and where their foundations have been. But we need to get to site to check that out.
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating to listen to you explaining this all so clearly, such an important angle to bring in, that we speak to engineers who really understand what's at play here. Of course, with the caveat that they haven't been on site yet. Not all the investigations have been done. But this really gives us a good understanding of what potentially is at play. That was Professor Richard Walls. He's a senior lecturer. He's a structural and civil engineer and also a fire expert. He's based at Stellenbosch University.